Upon learning that her husband bought himself a car for his anniversary after a business trip, his wife jokingly sat behind the wheel. But when she decided to give her mother-in-law a ride, Wendy surveyed the kitchen with satisfaction. The table, covered in a pristine white tablecloth, was laden with a variety of treats. Her husband would be thrilled when he returned from his business trip. There were two reasons to celebrate: his birthday and his return home. The scent of cinnamon and spices, mixed with the aroma of fresh baking, filled the home with warmth and anticipation of the celebration. For her beloved husband's 35th birthday, Wendy had decided to arrange a real surprise, hence the day off she had painstakingly obtained from work was entirely devoted to preparing for the anniversary. She had bought the necessary groceries in advance and had started early in the morning. Time flew by unnoticed. In the evening, Wendy decorated the house with garlands and greeting cards, then dressed up in a beautiful dress. She tried to create an atmosphere of coziness and warmth so Adrian would feel her love and care. The mother-in-law moved energetically between the table and the oven, adjusting napkins and arranging glasses. "Oh, Mom, you're simply magical," Wendy exclaimed, unable to contain her admiration. "Everything looks so beautiful." "Oh, Wendy," Angelina waved her hand dismissively, "it's nothing. The main thing is that Adrian is happy. It's a milestone anniversary, after all. We need to celebrate properly." Wendy smiled. Indeed, her mother-in-law was right, as always. 35 was an important milestone in any man's life. Deep down, she hoped this would be the start of a new, even happier chapter in their family life. They had met in their final year of university when they were young and full of ambition. Wendy was preparing to become a hematologist, while Adrian had committed his life to architecture and urban development. Love had sparked suddenly and brightly, like fireworks. Romantic dates, walks under the moon, and nights full of passion. But, in contrast, their family life had been measured, happy, filled with concerns about home, career, and the future. They saved money for renovations. They dreamed of children and a seaside vacation. Their plans were simple and understandable. "Where have the balloons gone?" Wendy asked, noticing an empty spot in the corner of the room. "Oh, I popped over to Olivia's, a friend, for the cake, and the boys," the mother-in-law spread her hands, "took them to play." "Oh well, I'll order new ones tomorrow." "Well, okay," Wendy agreed, though she disliked when things didn't go as planned. She had meticulously planned her husband's anniversary, and any adjustment threw her off balance. "You should rest a bit, Wendy," Angelina suggested. "You look exhausted. Adrian will be back soon. And besides, he's been away on business for 5 days, he must be starving. Home cooking is always better." Wendy nodded and, feeling a slight nervousness, sat down at the table to check that everything was ready for her husband's return and the arrival of guests. Initially, Adrian's birthday was to be celebrated in a cozy family setting, but then he wanted variety and a lively company. After all, the birthday person's wishes are law. Memories of past years flashed through her mind, laughter, tears of joy, and disappointment. She was happy with Adrian, but doubts sometimes crept into her soul. Her husband was very secretive about his affairs. He rarely talked about work or plans. And sometimes Wendy felt awkward, realizing that the person next to her, whom she knew so little about, was so close to her. A sudden noise outside made her jump up. "Adrian," she exclaimed, her heart pounding wildly. "He probably took a taxi to get here faster." She stepped outside and was stunned. Her husband emerged from a new, shiny dark blue car. Handsome as a movie star. Wendy gasped in amazement. What a surprise! Her husband appeared with a broad smile and, embracing her, kissed her on the cheek. "Well, happy anniversary to me." Adrian laughed, bowing playfully, and to the new car. "This is how you should travel on business trips." Wendy looked at the car again. The foreign make was clearly not new, but it was in excellent condition, beautiful and expensive. She wondered where Adrian had gotten the money for such a purchase. Adrian, she began, we were saving up for the house renovation. Yes, dear, I remember, but I had to work a bit. He brushed it off. There was a lucrative order, and voila, your husband is a happy owner of a low mileage car on his 35th birthday. What order? Wendy asked. Oh, just something, he replied evasively and grimaced, trivialities. Let's not talk about it. There's no need to suspect everything. After all, it's a celebration, and I'm tired as a dog after the business trip. Adrian took her hand, and they walked into the house. The guests had already gathered at the table, laughing and talking. Angelina joyfully watched her son. Look what a fine young man she had raised. Practically on her own, without a father. Wendy sat at the table, but she couldn't focus on the celebration. Adrian's words and his ambiguous answers troubled her. As usual, Wendy only drank juice. She had never liked alcohol, primarily due to unpleasant childhood memories. Mechanically making toasts in her husband's honor, Wendy continued to ask herself, where did he get such money? What is he hiding? Meanwhile, the evening continued in a festive and merry atmosphere. The guests joked a lot, congratulated the birthday boy, and gave gifts. The mother-in-law became so emotional that she even sang a few of her youthful songs at karaoke. Fortunately, the elderly woman's voice was indeed good. Wendy tried to be polite, smiled, but at the same time felt out of place. She stole a few furtive glances at Adrian. Her husband looked happy, relaxed, which only intensified her suspicion. Supposedly one family, no secrets, and here you are, such an expensive purchase. And it was bought without her on a business trip, right for the anniversary. It must have been planned in advance. It's unlikely one could just buy a car on a whim these days. When the guests left, Wendy got up from the couch and approached her husband, who was engrossed in his smartphone, obviously receiving congratulations on social media. Adrian, she began, I want you to explain everything to me. Where did you get the money for the car? Wendy, what's wrong with you? Irritation appeared on her husband's face. I told you, it was extra work. Let's not talk about it, okay? This day should be joyful, it's my anniversary. And I feel like I've been interrogated all this time. Besides, the car isn't just mine. You can take it, use it. You have a driver's license too. Wendy looked away, embarrassed. Her husband clearly knew what to emphasize. Having her own car was quite convenient, considering it took her about 40 minutes to reach the clinic by bus. Go, sit behind the wheel. Evaluate the purchase, Adrian smiled, and a minute later added, Wendy, maybe you could take Mom home? You could test drive the new car at the same time. Angelina's face lit up with joy. Getting a ride in her son's new car. Sure, they could have called a taxi, but it was better to go in their own. After all, Adrian hadn't bought it for nothing. Wendy looked at her husband with distrust, noticing a slight fatigue in his eyes. All right, she agreed, throwing a light jacket over her shoulders, I'll drive. By the way, is it automatic or manual? Automatic, Wendy. It's as simple as 2 + 2. Meanwhile, her mother-in-law climbed into the passenger seat with a smile on her face. Buckle up, Angelina, said Wendy as she started the engine. All right, just a moment, she replied. Wendy turned on the headlights and smoothly drove out of the yard. She felt a bit unsure of herself, reflecting her lack of driving experience. Moreover, the idea of taking a spin in her husband's brand new car seemed somewhat adventurous. On the other hand, it was getting late, and the road traffic was much calmer than during the day, especially during rush hour. Once on the highway, feeling more confident, Wendy gradually picked up speed. The engine hummed steadily, and the steering wheel responsively reacted to every movement. Wendy, is something bothering you? Angelina timidly asked. No, everything's fine, she replied, gripping the steering wheel tighter, just thinking about Adrian. All this is strange. The business trip, the expensive car. Ah, men, sighed Angelina, they all have their secrets. And we, women, are forced to pretend we don't notice. "Well, I hope his secrets aren't related to anything bad," Wendy whispered. "Don't worry. Adrian is a good person and is unlikely to have embarked on some adventure." Wendy nodded, though it was hard for her to convince herself of this. Truth be told, she couldn't shake off the thought about her husband's sources of money and the unusual joy with which he had presented the car to her. The rest of the road was filled with various conversations and shared impressions from the celebration. Finally, the first half of the journey was complete. After parking at the gate, Wendy helped her mother-in-law out of the car, and after saying goodbye, she drove back. The cabin suddenly felt unusually quiet. Wendy turned on the radio, but still couldn't focus. Suddenly, glancing back, she noticed an odd item that looked like a postcard lying on the back seat. Wendy slowed down and pulled over to the side of the road. Upon closer inspection, it turned out to be not a postcard, but an actual photograph. Perhaps it even belonged to the car's previous owner. Though, of course, that wasn't certain. Wendy cautiously picked it up and froze in astonishment. The photo depicted a young man with sad eyes and a pale face. She recognized him immediately. It was Henry Ballman, a patient in her department, who had been battling a rare blood disorder for several weeks. Rumors had it that Henry had been a quite successful businessman in the not-so-distant past, and most likely, the car had indeed belonged to him before. Wendy looked at the photo with sorrow. Unfortunately, despite the doctor's efforts, his condition had significantly worsened recently. The businessman's body was weakened, barely responding to treatment. In despair, Wendy closed her eyes. The car, bought by her husband, suddenly stopped appealing to her, especially considering who it might have belonged to before. Indeed. What a situation. A business trip, so it's called, Wendy thought sadly, and smoothly pulled away. The night had fully descended, and the starry sky seemed to have draped the city with its blanket. The road was nearly empty. Only occasionally, large trucks sped by, their drivers hurrying towards the nearest motel to rest and recharge. From a bird's-eye view, the road snaked away into the distance, and along it, like a long beetle, moved a passenger car with its headlights on. Overall, Wendy liked the car, easy to handle, a luxurious interior that smelled pleasantly of leather, soft music played from the speakers, and the engine quietly hummed in rhythm with the tires' rustle on the asphalt. Maybe it's not all that bad, she asked herself. So Adrian bought a car. So what? Nothing terrible has happened. Besides, it's still far from certain that its previous owner was Henry. After parking at the gate, she relievedly turned off the engine. The house greeted her with silence. Adrian was apparently already asleep. In the living room, remnants of the festive dinner still sat on the table, a reminder of the evening that had passed. Wendy quickly changed into her home clothes, feeling a wave of anxiety envelop her. In the bathroom, washing her face with cold water, she hoped to cool down the tumultuous emotions inside her, but it didn't help. "Adrian," she whispered, entering the bedroom. Her husband lay on his back, breathing calmly. His face was relaxed, as if nothing troubled him at all. She lay down, but sleep stubbornly eluded her. The thought of Henry still haunted her. Wendy remembered vividly his illness story. The businessman was so helpless, in need of treatment. And now his car was with Adrian? Memories surfaced in her mind unbidden, old as vintage film. Childhood, a home filled with sunlight, the smell of her mother's pies, her father smelling of cheaper cologne, Nicholas' cheeks and funny mustache that made him look like a kind wizard. Working as an engineer at a local factory, he always traveled for work but still found time for his family. "Daddy, will you come home soon?" young Wendy would invariably ask on the day of his departure, hugging his neck. "Of course, sweetheart, as soon as I finish work, I'll head straight home," he would reply, patting her head. Then came the telegram from the factory management. Cold, harsh words that forever shattered the world of her childhood dreams. An accident. A drunk driver veering into the oncoming lane. An attempt to avoid a collision and her father's death. A closed casket, a funeral, a photo in a mourning frame. After the farewell, her mother became withdrawn, fell into depression for several months, and sometimes sought solace at the bottom of a bottle. Her eyes, once so kind, suddenly dimmed and lost their spark of life. "Mom, don't cry," Wendy whispered, embracing her thin shoulders. "How am I supposed to go on without him, Wendy?" Nancy sobbed. Wendy closed her eyes, as if trying to hide from the pain of the past that sharply pierced her heart. After the tragic death, her mother became a pale shadow of her former self. She never managed to let another man into her life. She lived in the suburbs, in an old house in need of repairs. "Wendy, are you crying?" Adrian's whisper pulled her from her deep memories. She quickly wiped away her tears. "No, Adrian. Just can't sleep." "Memories again," he grumbled discontentedly. "Don't be sad, everything will be okay." "I'm not sad, just a strange anxiety in my heart." Her husband muttered something unintelligible and turned over. Wendy forced her eyes shut and again tried to fall asleep. Morning came unexpectedly. She woke up feeling shattered, as if she had worked a shift at a heavy factory. Gradually coming to her senses, she realized she needed to get up, gather her strength, and figure everything out. The bedroom was empty. Apparently, Adrian had already gone to work to share with the firm's management the work done on the trip. Wendy got up, went to the bathroom, washed her face, and looked at her reflection in the mirror. Her eyes were red from tears and lack of sleep. Her face was pale. She tried to smile, but it was very sad. Understandable, really. What was there to be happy about? The situation with the car purchase remained unclear, and her husband's explanation seemed extremely vague. What if I talked to that patient, Henry? Wendy thought, taking a sip of coffee. Especially considering she was his treating physician. The hematology department greeted her with its pristine cleanliness and white walls. The smell of disinfectant, usual for any medical facility, didn't stop Wendy from feeling at home. Her office was in its usual order, a sterile desk, instruments, and a computer where patient records were stored. Hematology was her element, her calling. Deep down, Wendy loved her job and tried to help her patients in every way, like a sorceress in a white coat. The first thing to do was make rounds. Her gaze naturally slid over the patients' faces, young, elderly, weakened by disease, all of them needed her help in one way or another. Wendy checked tests, interviewed patients, and prescribed treatments. Finally, she approached the room where the young businessman was. "Hello, Henry. How are you feeling?" Wendy's voice sounded calm and friendly, but her heart was pounding with nervousness. "Not well, doctor." "Tell me, when will I start feeling better?" the patient asked hopefully. She nodded, quickly recorded the necessary data in his chart, then turned back to him. "Henry, I need to ask you something. Where is your car currently?" His face paled, and a look of genuine surprise flashed in his eyes. "I don't understand how this relates to my illness." Wendy bit her lip. "Oh, how awkward that was. While I've been ill, I authorized my deputy, Ronnie Wood, to take the car from the garage, but I don't know exactly where the car is now," Henry whispered. "Thank you. And your car is blue, the 7th model after the redesign, right?" she persisted. "Yes, it is. A foreign make, bought at the dealership with my own money. But as you understand, I can't drive it now. Mostly, my deputy drives it," Henry smiled. Eager to defuse the situation, Wendy smiled back immediately. Of course, to completely dispel all doubts, she could have taken a photo of the car, but in her opinion, that would have been too much. Wishing Henry a speedy recovery, she left the room. Walking down the corridor, Wendy subconsciously analyzed her husband's actions. Why did Adrian hide his source of income from her? And why did he buy that particular car? I need to talk to him again. Let him explain how Henry Ballman's photo ended up there, Wendy thought, nodding to a passing nurse. Entering her office, she again pulled out the folder with patients' medical histories and began to study them, but a sudden knock on the door prevented her from continuing. "Wendy, the chief physician is calling for you," a nurse informed her, poking her head through the door, then after a slight pause, added, "Victor is waiting for you in the conference room. He's convened a board, seems unhappy, they say. It's about Henry, apparently." Wendy sighed sadly and, setting aside the forms with test results, left her office. Here we go again. No doubt the chief is worried about the clinic's reputation again and fears keeping a patient with a severe illness within its walls. Wendy envisioned the possible consequences: lawyers, lawsuits, compensation. Though, what damage could there be if Henry is alone? The atmosphere in the conference room was tense. Around the large, oval table sat doctors of various specialties: a cardiologist, a pulmonologist, a surgeon. Each was well known in the city, and some even beyond its limits. The young female doctor felt their stares, which bore an unmistakable condemnation. "Wendy, I hope you are aware of the situation," Victor began as all the board members gathered at the table. "The condition of your patient, Henry Ballman, is frankly unstable. We've discussed this issue with colleagues, and we've concluded he might need more specialized help. You understand what I mean? There are specialized clinics in the capital that might be able to assist him." Wendy cautiously interrupted her boss. "Victor, I understand your concern, of course. But at the same time, I believe that the move could be fatal. His condition is extremely unstable right now, and a flight to the capital is an unavoidable risk." "Are you sure about that, Wendy?" Ian, the head of the ICU department, asked displeasingly. "Is there anyone else in the clinic who might share your view?" Wendy paled but then countered, "I am his treating physician. I have been monitoring his condition for a month, and so I know that he will not withstand such a trip." "We understand this is a serious step," the chief physician interjected roughly, "but right now, we all need to consider all options. Moving him would allow us to involve leading specialists. Unfortunately, we do not have the equipment that is available in the capital's clinics." "Victor, you know very well that we have done everything possible," Wendy argued fervently. "We have all the necessary resources. And if we start fussing with the move now, we'll only lose the time we still have. Trust me. Otherwise, we won't make it." "We can't wait any longer," Vincent, a surgeon with extensive experience and practice, stated sharply. "We must do everything possible to save the patient. Unfortunately, sometimes doctors are forced to make decisions that contradict personal convictions. And you, Wendy, need to remember that." "So, you think my opinion doesn't matter?" Wendy asked, feeling her cheeks flush with heat. "No, why would you think that?" Victor raised his voice in response. "We understand your attachment to the patient. But in this situation, it's important to assess the risks and make decisions that, in our collective view, will be the best." "I will do everything within my power," Wendy assured, "but I will not act against my conscience. If necessary, I will go to the ministry, do you hear? Believe me, moving the patient in such a condition is akin to suicide. Let his condition stabilize a bit first. Then I will personally go with him." "All right, let it be so," Victor conceded. "I'll give you another week, but only under your personal responsibility, and you must write a corresponding statement. I shouldn't have to teach you, you know all this. As the chief physician, the reputation of our clinic is important to me." Wendy left the conference room feeling exhausted and depleted. A sense of injustice and mistrust burned inside her. At that moment, it seemed that her colleagues not only doubted her professionalism but were ready to openly condemn her actions. After all, every doctor, from a general practitioner to an orthopedist, is first and foremost a professional, not someone who becomes emotionally attached to their patients. Upon entering her office, Wendy immediately wrote a statement declaring that she would assume full responsibility for the treatment, acknowledging the consequences and potential risks. After handing the document to a nurse, she cautiously peeked into Henry's room. The businessman was asleep. Only the beeping of various machines connected to his body disturbed the silence of the room. Mentally wishing him health, Wendy decided to get some fresh air at the entrance and also to call Adrian. After all, they hadn't really spoken yesterday. There was the business trip, the anniversary, the festive hustle. Once outside, she pulled out her phone and tried to reach him, hoping to hear her husband's voice and share her concerns, but Adrian did not answer. His phone was turned off. At that moment, Wendy noticed the familiar figure of Antonio, the janitor, who was sweeping a small alley in front of the clinic. Antonio was known to be reserved, but at the same time, kind and attentive. Wendy decided that talking to him might help her distract from the tension of recent days. "Antonio, good afternoon," she greeted him. "How are things?" "Hello, Wendy," the janitor smiled back. "Things are okay. Just dealing with vagrants." "With vagrants?" Wendy was surprised. "Yes, with them, the wretched ones." Antonio waved his hand as if swatting away annoying flies. "A little guy, Michael, lived in the attic. The door was constantly open. So I decided to keep an eye on who was causing trouble, but I couldn't catch him. I still limp from an accident I had. Well, I shuffle my feet when I walk. And you can hear everything in the stairwell. Then my son suggested I install a hidden camera. That's how I figured out it was Michael. Caught him, and the committee placed him in an orphanage." Wendy listened attentively to his story, momentarily forgetting about the contentious situation caused by the medical board. Antonio spoke simply, without unnecessary emotions, but his voice carried a hidden concern. "Poor kid. Only 7 years old. His mother died, his stepfather drinks and makes him beg. I thought that older vagrants had settled in the attic, but it was a child. Michael is a capable boy. He opens locks with a paperclip or a nail and goes to the attic. It's warm there, and there are plenty of old, unclaimed books. But anyway, that aside. Here's another thing, Wendy, this camera, well, for filming, doesn't anyone need it? Maybe the patients can use it. It's just lying in my storeroom and used. It's a shame to throw it away. It's good, inconspicuous, small, sees everything. My son says he bought it at a pawn shop for a mere pittance. Could I take it?" Wendy unexpectedly asked herself. The janitor looked at her in surprise. "Why do you need it? You're a doctor, not a cameraman." "Well, I don't know. It might come in handy," she answered evasively. "Then take it." "I'll get it now. It's just a tiny thing, practically invisible," the janitor hurried, and a few minutes later, he brought a small box. "Let it bring you joy and not disappointment." Wendy thanked him and returned to her department. There were still a few hours left until the end of her shift, so it was the perfect time to work for the common good. Still feeling the sting and bitterness after the discussion with her colleagues, she was confused. She didn't want to seem paranoid, but her intuition told her that something was definitely off with Adrian. The idea to install a hidden camera in her husband's car came to her spontaneously, a moment of inspiration that gave her hope for clarity soon. An unexplainable, inner feeling told her that talking to her husband would yield nothing. So Adrian was on a business trip. So he bought, supposedly cheaply, a used car. So what? That's no reason to panic and complain to his mother. Time stretched, rubber-like, but Wendy was fine with that, as she managed to accomplish a lot at work. Finally, the workday came to an end. Wrapped in a coat, piercing through the autumn wind, she hurried toward the bus stop. Her husband, of course, was also great. Bought a car, could have picked up his wife from work. After all, he would get a few days off accounted as business trip days. He still had time to rest. Returning home, Wendy again found Adrian absent, even though the car was parked at the gate, like a silent witness to the anniversary and the celebration. "So we meet again," Wendy whispered bitterly, closing the door. The atmosphere in the rooms indicated that her husband had been home recently, probably for lunch, then left again. The car keys lay on a table in the hallway. Wendy put the kettle on, then went back outside. She was determined to install the camera. Carefully opening the car door, she surveyed the interior, considering where best to place this cunning device. Selecting the right spot, Wendy skillfully fixed the camera, aiming it inside the cabin to capture the driver and any potential passenger. Adrian returned home late in the evening, as always tired and slightly irritable. Something happened? Wendy asked, trying to sound calm. You seem on edge. Something wrong at work? No, everything's fine, he replied, sitting down at the table, just tired. The business trip was tough. The director demands accountability for each day, as if I'm some embezzler. But I'm ready to account for every penny, he said, propping his chin with his hands, not even touching the dinner she had prepared. Wendy approached him, placing her hand on his shoulder. Want me to make some coffee? No, thanks, Adrian responded, distancing himself from her. Sorry, I'm just not hungry. Wendy felt a spasm grip her heart. She couldn't understand exactly what was happening, but she felt that her husband was definitely hiding something. She was about to ask again about the car when suddenly the silence in the kitchen was pierced by the trill of his smartphone's ringtone. Adrian jumped up as if stung and rushed to the phone. Hello, Evan? Yes, I'll be there. Yes. Are you leaving again? Wendy asked disappointedly. Her husband averted his gaze, embarrassed. Yes. The boss called. Seems he has some important offer. Why at this time of night? Can't it wait until tomorrow? Wendy asked with hurt in her voice. Adrian snorted in frustration. If it could wait, I would have done that. All right, I'll go. It'll be faster by car. If you're asleep when I get back, just go to bed. I'll use my key to get in. Saying this, he left for work. At the same time, Wendy turned on the computer and found the software to view the video from the camera. Eagerly anticipating the results of her endeavor, she sat in the room and watched the footage. About an hour passed. Wendy was starting to doze off when suddenly some movement appeared on the screen. Adrian got into the car and opened the passenger door for someone. At that moment, a young woman got into the cabin. Wendy held her breath. She didn't know this beauty, but by her figure and the way she dressed, she realized she was definitely younger than herself. At that moment, Adrian was the first to speak to the passenger, and his wife had the perfect opportunity to find out what the conversation was about. Wendy wished she hadn't seen it. At first, her husband spoke sweet words to the beauty, and then he kissed her passionately on the lips. Thank you, Ronnie. You're a miracle. Helped with the car and the company's moving forward. A little more, and it'll be ours, Adrian said with a smile. And there was Wendy, still unable to believe that her husband, the man she loved more than life, was cheating on her. And in such an openly shameless way. She turned off the computer and collapsed on the bed, unable to get up. Her heart was shattered to pieces. The mistress's name, Ronnie, still echoed in her ears. Wasn't this the Ronnie to whom Henry had recklessly transferred his car? In that case, some things were becoming clear. Adrian had bought the car for a bargain from his own mistress, who, confident of her boss's impending demise, had taken liberties with his property. Truthfully, Wendy didn't know what to do. She didn't want to destroy her family, but at the same time, she couldn't forgive the betrayal. A decision had to be made, and Wendy understood that it was going to be very, very hard. The choice was limited. Forgive her husband or leave and file for divorce in time. Hastily packing her things in a bag, she wondered where was she to go, especially in the middle of the night. To her college friend Emily? But she had a family of her own. Then where? To a hotel? What if there were no rooms available? Maybe go to her mother-in-law, Angelina? She certainly wouldn't turn her away. A frantic thought raced through her mind. After a moment's thought, Wendy grabbed her bag and flung open the door. In the taxi on the way to her mother-in-law's house, she desperately tried to collect her thoughts, not knowing what awaited her, fearing judgment and misunderstanding. At the same time, she knew she couldn't continue to stay with someone who had betrayed her. Angelina greeted the late visitor with anxiety in her eyes. Wendy, dear, what happened? Why have you come in the middle of the night? Is something wrong with Adrian? No, Adrian is fine, Wendy whimpered softly. It's just your son, he cheated on me. I saw it all with my own eyes. Angelina paled and ran her hand through her hair. From her mother-in-law's expression, Wendy immediately knew it was a shock. "Dear, don't cry," Angelina whispered after regaining her composure. "I understand it hurts. It's a great sorrow, but you are strong, you will get through this." "But how can I forgive him? How can I live with him after this?" Angelina stroked her daughter-in-law's hair. "Don't think about it now. You came to me. You're safe here. I promise, we'll figure everything out, but you must understand, life definitely doesn't end here. It's just beginning. You are young, beautiful, smart, you have everything ahead of you. Adrian has made his choice. It's all because of me. I couldn't give him children," Wendy sobbed. "We tried so many times, went to countless doctors, all in vain. Don't be upset, dear, it'll pass. Children don't necessarily have to be born. If it doesn't work out, you can adopt one from an orphanage," Angelina said softly. Wendy's face brightened. Indeed, Angelina had said such simple, ordinary things, yet they comforted her. An orphanage. How had she not thought of that before? And she was a doctor, too. Hindsight is always 20/20, as they say. Thank you for your kindness, for your support. Just don't try to dissuade me, please, I won't go back. A broken cup can't be mended. And why should it? Wendy said quietly and hugged her mother-in-law. Having stayed up late into the night in the kitchen, Wendy only went to bed after midnight. The most surprising thing was that Adrian hadn't even bothered to call her. Maybe he hadn't even come home yet? Quite possible, given Ronnie's amorousness. She had certainly positioned herself well, managing to sell her lover the car of its living owner. And now, by the sound of it, she had set her sights on his business. One could only guess what that had cost her. Especially since illegal forgery of documents is both dangerous and criminal. Adrian only called early in the morning, announcing his return home, obviously after a prolonged date. "Wendy, where are you hiding? I came home from work, and you're nowhere to be found. What's this all about?" Adrian flared up over the phone. Wendy bit her lip painfully but still found the strength to respond. "Firstly, stop speaking to me in that tone. And secondly, be kind enough to explain where you've been all night and with whom." "What do you mean, where and with whom?" "I was at work, presenting a report on the business trip to the management. In the company director's office." "You can call and check," Adrian lied smoothly, well aware that his wife would not bother to verify. But Wendy had a ready response. "Stop treating me like a fool, Adrian. I know everything. There's a hidden camera installed in your car, and I saw everything. And I know all about your Ronnie too. Do you call her Wendy as well?" A tense silence hung in the air for a moment over the phone. "What camera? What are you talking about? Why all this?" "Because I'm filing for divorce." "Your mother already knows everything," Wendy replied, struggling to contain her emotion. Adrian clenched his despised smartphone painfully in his fingers. "Stop trying to scare me, you hear? You couldn't have done it. You're terrified of your mother-in-law. Where did all this courage come from?" Wendy smirked and whispered faintly, "Goodbye, Adrian, I've said all I wanted to. Whether you believe it or not is up to you. See you at the divorce, and good luck in your personal life." Her husband wanted to say something else, but Wendy turned off the phone and leaned tiredly against the back of the chair. Her mother-in-law stood a little away, looking at her daughter-in-law with pity. Tears of realization of her son's folly had frozen in Angelina's eyes. They had had such a good family, the envy of everyone. And now this. Though, maybe all was not lost. What doesn't happen in life? But Wendy was determined. And as she prepared for work, she was sure she would not change her decision. At first glance, infidelity seems easy to forgive. But how do you live with it afterward? How do you greet your husband from work or, conversely, pack his suitcase for a business trip, fully aware that someone who has betrayed once will do it again? Unfortunately, the morning in the hematology department greeted her with an atmosphere of escalating panic. Instead of the usual bustle of the medical staff, there was an anxious whisper. Deep concern was evident in the nurse's eyes. "Wendy," Katie grabbed her hand, "there's an emergency. Henry got worse last night. He's in a coma." The world around Wendy collapsed. She couldn't breathe, speak, her legs gave way, and her vision blurred. "How did this happen?" she whispered. "I don't know, Wendy," the head nurse replied. "We entered the room, and he just lost consciousness. We immediately called the anesthesiologist." "And what next?" "I wasn't here last night," the doctor insisted. "So far, nothing good," Aoife added. "His condition is very critical. And the chief physician is very angry." Wendy felt an icy knot tighten inside her. She knew all too well what very angry meant for Victor. It meant a storm that could destroy her career and drag her medical reputation through the mud. Wendy quickly headed to the ICU, pushing through a crowd of agitated doctors and nurses. Silence prevailed in the room, broken only by the steady rhythmic sound of the artificial ventilation machine. The businessman lay on the bed, pale and motionless. "His condition is critical," the anesthesiologist explained, catching her glance. "We're trying to stabilize his vital signs, but the situation is very difficult. If he doesn't pull through, it'll be a tragedy for him and for you." "What do you mean?" She felt her legs weaken. "Wendy," Ron said, "if the patient dies, you're facing serious consequences. Criminal charges, revocation of your medical license. Believe me, it's all very real, not just some medical horror stories." Wendy paled. She understood where this was heading. The chief physician would try to pin the blame on her again, making her the scapegoat. But she was innocent. At that moment, the anesthesiologist gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "Wendy, it's important to stay calm right now. We're doing everything we can to save your patient, but you must be prepared for any outcome." She remained in the ICU, watching over Henry and the steady rhythm of the machine, as if it were counting down the time they had left. The chief physician had not specifically called her to his office. Why bother, when everything was clear? It wasn't for no reason he had made Wendy write that statement. He had long secured himself against such incidents. It's all the fault of the treating doctor who insisted on canceling the patient's transfer to a better-equipped clinic. Let her deal with the consequences herself, and if she can't, it's her problem. Dismissal, and move on, find a new job. How else? Medicine is a serious business, loving discipline. What happens if every doctor starts to bend their own way, ignoring the words of management? It's not long before the clinic's leadership changes. Victor could not afford that. He didn't climb to his position by any means necessary just to lose everything because of a reckless employee. Wendy was on edge all day. Visiting Henry's room several times, not trusting the nurses, she personally checked his vital signs. She also distinctly felt the unfriendly glares of colleagues and heard their muted whispering behind her back. Around noon, an elegantly dressed woman in a strict trousers suit entered the room, accompanied by a notary with a thick folder in his hands. "Hello," the visitor said coldly. "I am Ronnie Wood, Henry's deputy. We've come to make a will." Wendy looked at her with undisguisable hatred. What nerve! Coming uninvited and trying to assert rights. "Your boss is in a coma," Wendy replied icily, bitterness in her voice, "so you cannot make a will while he is unconscious." "Well, that's none of your business, Doctor," Ronnie replied snidely, "and I need to persuade the patient of the necessity of this document. I'm here to protect my boss's interests. And as far as I understand, you're not very keen on doing that. It's precisely because of you that Henry is in this condition. How dare you accuse me?" Wendy flared up. "I'm doing everything possible. And you go and manage my husband, notice, my ex-husband. Or did you think I wouldn't find out?" "That's quite possible," Ronnie stated coldly, "and stop trying to intimidate me. Believe me, for such negligent treatment of a patient, you will definitely face consequences." Wendy froze, unable to utter a word. She felt her heart ache painfully from the pain and insult. "Get out," she said. "I repeat for those hard of hearing, leave the room." Adrian's mistress looked around warily, then snarled, "Listen, you doctor, you have no right to throw me out of the clinic. Don't forget, I have rights too." After her words, the notary coughed awkwardly and turned towards the window. "Right now, your rights are nothing compared to the fact that we are fighting for his life." Wendy tensed. "Leave before I call security or the police." Ronnie momentarily lost her composure and, casting a contemptuous glance, quickly exited the room, dragging her companion along. Wendy heavily sat down on a chair and, closing her eyes, whispered, "Please hold on, Henry. I'll do everything I can, just don't leave, please." From that day, Wendy's life turned into a chaotic sequence of night shifts, sleepless nights, and anxious days. Spending all her free time in the room, she read books aloud to Henry and quietly whispered words of support, hoping he could hear her. Despite the gravity of the situation, something inside Wendy changed. She couldn't explain it, but Henry, the critically ill patient, awoke something special in her: empathy, care, and even tenderness. Her own life, which had seemed stable and routine before, crumbled in an instant. As it turned out, Adrian was the first to file for divorce. Wendy did not try to hold him back, for her heart was occupied with another, who might never even know of her feelings. In turn, Angelina became an unexpected support for her. The kind, caring mother-in-law took Wendy into her home, understanding how poorly her son had treated her. "Wendy, dear," Angelina said, "don't blame yourself. You're doing everything you can. Henry is a strong man. He will surely wake up. And no one will touch you. Just think, such a good doctor. Let someone else try to find a second one like you." "But what if I can't save him?" Wendy whispered. "What then?" "Don't be afraid, Wendy. You are a true master of your craft. You've done all that was possible. And even, I think, what was not," the mother-in-law quietly added, genuinely regretting that Adrian had never understood his fortune. Angelina's words, full of warmth and understanding, gave strength. Wendy returned to Henry's bedside again and again, reading him excerpts from his favorite books, telling him about her workdays and her hope for the better. Days turned into weeks. Henry's condition remained stable but unchanged. Wendy felt her strength waning. She was tired from sleepless nights, constant anxiety, tension, and endless waiting. But, having once taken the Hippocratic Oath, she could not give up. During one of the night shifts, Wendy noticed some movement in Henry's finger. Her heart stopped. She listened, held her breath. Henry's fingers twitched again, and then he slowly opened his eyes. "Wendy, where am I?" Henry murmured, trying to look around. "Did you wake up?" she exclaimed, unable to contain her emotions. The businessman tried to smile weakly, still not understanding what had happened. At that moment, barely containing her excitement, Wendy told him about his condition and long coma. "Really, have I been asleep that long?" he whispered, asking for water. "I'll bring it now, but you can't drink it." "I'll moisten your lips with a damp swab," Wendy explained. Henry obediently closed his eyes. "Thank you," he said, touching her hand. "You saved my life." Gradually, Henry began to recover. It turned out that the state of coma had triggered hidden processes in his body, allowing him to find the resources for healing. Overall, the businessman spent 3 months in the clinic, undergoing not only treatment but also subsequent rehabilitation. Slowly, very slowly, his strength returned. Soon, Henry began to smile again, joke, and make plans for the future. When Ronnie learned that her boss had come out of the coma, she tried to impose her terms again, but he was unyielding. Moreover, learning about the illegal sale of his car, he went to the police and filed the necessary statement. Initially, Ronnie was confident she would face no consequences, but when the police uncovered the truth, she became uneasy. Adrian, trying to weather the storm on another business trip, was also reached by the long arm of the law. He defended himself as best he could, hiring expensive lawyers and trying to pin everything on his mistress, but it was futile. There was the recording from the hidden camera against them. As it happened, Wendy received her divorce almost automatically. Her husband was sentenced to 3 years in prison. The judge's verdict shocked many, but not Wendy, who had seen the true face of her unfaithful husband. Angelina, too, saw Adrian differently, although, like any mother, she continued to support him in prison. She understood he was her only blood, though wayward. Yet there was another daughter, Wendy, the only support and consolation. After the incredible healing of Henry, the clinic also began to see personnel changes. These primarily affected the chief physician, who had been so fearful for his reputation that he became a victim of his own ambitions. Wendy, thanks to her statement and refusal to transport the patient to a better-equipped clinic, received significant support in medical circles in the region, and one fine day, she became the head of the department. After this appointment, Wendy and Henry spent a lot of time together. Moreover, love reawakened in the young woman's heart for the man who had given her hope, making her believe in miracles. The lovers did not talk much about the future, simply enjoying every minute they spent together. At that moment, Wendy realized that happiness was not about a lavish wedding or luxurious gifts, but about simple things, a loved one's smile, care, and sincere understanding. She had found her happiness, despite all obstacles, in quiet harmony with the man she had saved despite all the hurdles from upper management. In some ways, this love was Wendy's reward for all those sleepless nights spent in Henry's room. The issue with children was resolved quite simply, too, helped by none other than the janitor, Antonio, who brought Michael to the wedding to place him in a good, loving family. "Is this my future mom and dad?" the boy whispered in amazement. Wendy and Henry looked at each other in surprise, and the elderly janitor, barely holding back a smile, said, "Well, out of the mouths of babes." Their response was the infectious laughter of the bride and groom, who after a long kiss took the boy by the hands. Half a year later, after all the guardianship procedures were completed, Wendy delighted her men with news of her pregnancy.